Good evening and welcome to the next edition of Bytes. Thank you very much for joining us. I am shamelessly calling this season 3 because we've been going for 3 years now. We appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Tonight, I am super thrilled to be joined by two extremely talented designers, Tim Lutkin and Andrzej Goulding, who have just put Life of Pi into the West End. Which I went to go see last week, and congratulations to you both on fantastic design, and congratulations on the Olivier Awards, Tim. Well done.
Thank you. And Andrzej.
And absolutely.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. So I wasn't going to let that opportunity slip by to have a conversation. So thank you for taking the time and for joining us. So give us a little bit of history about the show, because it didn't obviously start at West End. So, tell us about it.
History on the show, so the context of how it ended up in the West End was that Simon Friend, producer, had a few years ago, something like 5 years ago, I think, had acquired the rights to the film, or the book, actually. But I think that came with some combined rights to anything in the film as well. I'm not sure how that worked, but he had done that. And then for about 18 months to 2 years, it kind of circulated between various directors and designers. And it kind of landed on Rob Howell's desk for a bit, and Matthew Warchus was going to look at it. And then Rob didn't take it on, because they hadn't got a venue. And then it ended up with Tim Hatley. And that's when it really kind of started to move forward. And Simon booked the Sheffield Crucible as a co-production. Do you want to fill in on any of that? Do you know the history of Rob?
I don't know all of that. I knew that Rob was part of it at one point.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I didn't really know much until Tim and Max, other Tim, asked me to come in to talk about potentially doing the show. Yeah, so
basically when Tim came on board, Tim Hatley, set designer that is, things really ramped up and they got very serious with it. And then Max came on board, and one of the reasons Max was asked to do it was his work on the Lorax, which had lots of puppets in it. And I think there was a connection because Rob Howell had designed the Lorax at the Old Vic, and I think he suggested him to Simon Friend at some point. So that was its kind of little journey. And then there you are. Simon's got a contract with Sheffield Crucible. Tim's coming up with ideas and reached out to us too. So that's kind of how it worked.
Amazing. And how, we'll dig into the nuts and bolts a little bit as we go, but how much has the look and feel of the show evolved from the initial Crucible production, or is it, I mean, obviously it had to adapt for a new venue, but aside from that, how close are you to the original design?
To the original. Well, when Tim took it on, he decided that because the Crucible is such a difficult, it's not a difficult space, it's a different space. Do you guys know the Crucible space in Sheffield? It's essentially a big thrust theatre that was designed in the late 60s. So Tim said, well, rather than think about its eventual life, which will be a proscenium theatre, I'm just going to design it for the Crucible and make it work in that space. Mainly to make the play itself work and the writing work. And that's why we ended up with the very kind of thrusty stage with the revolve, and almost semi in the round at Crucible. It's only one side is where the audience don't sit. And the other thing you can do in the Crucible is take out the whole stage, and if you want, you can have just a big void. So Tim designed this custom boat shape stage, which had a big kind of 6-foot drop around the edge. And that's why we ended up with this shape in the auditorium, which is actually, although it's a big thrusty stage coming out of the Wyndhams, it's actually the shape of the boat. When the boat is downstage, it mimics the shape of the boat. So yeah, that was an interesting choice of Tim's, because lots of things at the Crucible, like everyone's talking about Jamie. Got the title of that show right?
Is
that right? That started there, but very much in the kind of, yes, we know this is going into a pros theatre, so what do we do to make that work? But although that did have a thrust feel to it. But Tim was like, I'm just going to make it work there. And he kind of had it in the back of his mind that it would go somewhere else. But that was his main choice, which is a big choice, because the investment in the build of the set and the revolve and the boat was potentially not transferable. And it would have been a completely new build, potentially. But we found the Wyndhams, and Cameron McIntosh, who owns the Wyndhams, allowed us to pull the stalls out and reseat the stalls, re-raking it, which allowed for the revolve of the boat and all of that mechanism to sit where it does in the space, which is a lot more forward than would normally be in the space.
Right.
So kind of that's how it evolved, really.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Andrzej, from your side, how do you start approaching a project like this? Because I mean, I could appreciate Tim's journey, having lit the odd show myself.
Yeah.
But what's your process? How do you begin on something like that?
Well, I mean, when I first went to see the model, Tim had a couple of printouts on the floor of the model and the wall, I think. So he had a printout of some sea for the floor, and I think it was a sky on the wall. That's about it. But it showed you, if we wanted to fill the space with an image of some kind, this is kind of what you'd be dealing with. And aside from that, I think there were some storyboards that Tim had done with some Photoshop on here and there. I don't remember exactly what they looked like, to be honest, because it was a while ago now. But yeah, that's kind of that's just to kind of get it in my head. That's what we're thinking of as far as what we can apply to it. So that's my starting point, I suppose. And then it's all script reading. It's I tend to 3D model every set that I work with, which comes from my set design background, which I used to do 3D models for Rob Howell. It's another thing. So I worked with Rob, and actually that's where me and Tim first met, because Tim was an associate with Hugh, and I was similar for Rob and John on Ghost and things like that. So I learned all of that then, and I still do that today. So I do every show, I do a 3D model, and it's not to use for the video design. Well, I mean, it is now, but back then it was just to get my head into the space. And it means I can really look at it. I can look at surfaces, and I can just, along with the script and a cue list and things like that, I kind of get it all going. And then I like to draw a lot. So even though it's all computer animation, film, that kind of end product, I do a lot of drawing as far as storyboarding. So there's loads of sketches of things that didn't make the show that are in the show, tiger claws across the space, loads of things, and it's just a quick form of design. So I kind of do all of that, and then I present those to whoever wants to look at them. But generally, it's a lot of back and forth with the director, and then from there I'll start to do I guess animation samples. I'll do 3D renderings. There was a lot to figure out on this with water, which approach to go with. And that evolved a lot from the original to the new one, because we had the big 2-year hiatus. So I learned a whole bunch of new techniques, so I put them into the new version of the show, which probably wouldn't have gone in had we gone straight in at the time we would have done. So, it's I guess an ever evolving design in that respect. And, if we do it again, I'll do some more changes. And that process keeps going on. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the one you talk about water, the one moment that, spoiler alert perhaps, so sorry if anyone hasn't seen the show, but the one moment that just it's breathtaking is you go from one of the first boat scenes back into the hospital, and there's that lovely water ripple, and the tiles just ripple back into the room.
Yeah.
And the first time you did that, I was like, oh yeah, do that again. And you did, which was lovely.
Well, it's a trick. I mean, my favorite thing with video in general is surprising the audience. And the only, it's a thing I've done before, but if you present the audience, it's a classic magic trick effect. You present them with one thing, only to subvert their expectation, and it becomes something else. So we present them with tiles at the beginning, as you walk in, and actually you don't really know, ideally, if they're real or not, because the balance of lighting and video doesn't give that away. And then we do all the changes, but it means that when I wanted to, I could make those tiles do something weird or different. And the rippling just made a lot of sense. It was the idea that the room was becoming the ocean, I suppose, and rather than just do a boat up, snap in, we could do a merge, which was really fun.
Yeah. And the other thing that Andrzej does, which is quite unique, is lots of hand drawing and animating of his own. And quite often with a video designer, you show an idea and then it makes its way around like 10 people. But there's always like a ton of animators, and then like in preview 6 you might see it. But with Andrzej, it's like, and it's like on the floor stage, and it's amazing. So I was just going to say that he does a lot of like the animation of the.
Yeah, I mean, I do all my own animation on all my shows. So I mean, yeah. Occasionally I'll have 3D modelers if it's a little bit dull to do, because I just find 3D modeling a bit boring. But as far as the animation of it, the compositing and all of that, I just like doing it all myself. And I guess the advantage you get, like Tim mentioned, is you can get a quick response. Because when I'm on a show, my brain's completely in it. I know where everything is. And I have a system where I can throw After Effects straight onto the stage. So I can literally like paint onto any surface I want, and I can grade it. So it means if the director turns around, or anyone really, and goes, should we try this as an idea? Rather than making something and coming back the next day, I'll very quickly mock up even a really simple version and just let it run, and we'll be like, yeah, that's the right thing. And we'll know straight away whether it feels right for the show, and then I can go and refine it. And yeah, just being able to do that yourself means I can do that, because if I had to do it with an animator, I don't think the complication of piping them through to the stage while trying to relay something through, stopping tech, it just gets a little bit cumbersome. So
well, there's also the time it takes to explain what you want and correct any misinterpretations and all that kind of stuff that I guess goes away. You touched on the sort of blending, wasn't the word you used, of lighting and video. And that was the one thing that struck me, is there were moments where I was looking at going, is that video or is that lighting? I actually can't tell. And that's, congratulations for that, because normally you can go, oh, that's a whatever.
Yeah.
How? I mean, what was the sort of process? Because I mean, there's moments where I'm going, is that you doing a streak, or is that AV? Yeah. Is it an illusion in the haze? But
we mixed it a lot, and actually,
but do lots of mixing.
I mean, when it came down to it, it was a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
We were in every single morning. We started from as soon as tech was done, we started from the top of the show, and we went through the entire thing. It took us about a week, just over a week and a bit.
Yeah.
To go through every single bit and balance and make choices, and because at one point you were sidelighting the wall with a thing, and then I tried doing it with the video as a mapping thing, and it kind of went back and forward, and then we settled on that, and then the lighting of the boat. It was like discovering, Tim was like, what happens if you try and light that little front bit of the boat? You've got a projector there.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, let's have a look at that. And then, on that goes, and the middle of the boat is a video projector pointed down, but Tim has full control, so I don't do anything with that. But because it's video, it's cut to the shape of the boat and it's tracked to the revolve, so we don't do any work on getting that to line up. But Tim's got full control.
Yeah, through the desk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the kind of broad comment to make on it really is that you have to have two people that really enjoy the great things about each other's crafts, I think. So as soon as Andrzej started to light bits of the boat and try things on the wall that were actually away from traditional video content, creating a texture or a time and location, it actually got quite exciting, because then I'm like, that's something we can't do with the moving lights or our kind of generic wash or anything. And that's when it started to turn into exactly what you're describing is where you can't really tell what's coming from a projector and what's coming from a moving light. And still, if I watch the show now, the thing that top lights the boat is actually lighting Pi and the Tiger a lot of the time, and that's a projector that we plotted through the lighting desk, which has various shapes. It's like a fixture we have. And it just became this amazing tool, because what we would have done with a ton of moving lights is try to track the boat. And whenever it's stationary, we would have had a new focus of lots of shuttering. But, we just turn that light on that full and off it goes. You know that anything that happens in the boat is lit. Quite a smart angle as well. It looks really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's directly from above. And actually, there's a little trick you can do. If you defocus it ever so slightly, you get rid of the projector grid.
Yeah.
But you get generally through a focus projector. Yeah. So if I'm doing, lighting effects through the projector, and it's something that's a bit more loose on the floor, for example, I'll take the focus out. And we can do that now through the video desk as well. So we can pull it into focus and out of focus during the show. So I've done that on other shows in the past as well. But it's like, there are, like Tim said, there are things that video can do better. There are things that lighting can do better. I mean, my favorite thing to mix is highly saturated lighting with video within it, and we do that a lot in the show.
Yeah.
And it's something that video projectors really struggle with. So I'm like, well, what's the point of me doing it?
Yeah.
You do that, and actually then it merges with all of your other lighting better.
Yeah.
And then I'm picking out.
There's a thing with the luster tubes, the indigo chip, that video projectors can't do anything close to that.
Right.
And there's a few times when the wall is just washed with the indigo chip from the circle front, and you go, because that's not what the projectors have done all evening. And then it's a moment, because then you're like, okay, projectors ain't doing that color. Yeah. And same thing on the floor when we go to the kind of starscape moment. We kind of, the projection's doing what it can do very well, which is the cyans and the cold and the stars, the white stars. And then there's a luster 2 cover with just the indigo chip kind of on a very slow effect at quite a low level. And it looks like it's part of the video, but it's not. And it adds such depth of color, which you don't get from the projectors. So there's lots of that going on.
That's what it adds a lot. It's weirdly, it adds depth. We used it a lot in the skies. Yeah. Because again, a sky is a sky, and I can grade it to different things, but actually the sunset one in particular, just adding that saturated color at a low level across it gave it a richness to some of those. There are these paintings that people do that kind of glow a bit more under low light. You have special kind of paints and stuff, and it looks a bit like that. It gives it a luminosity. Yeah. And there's that fish section as well, where they kind of swim around underwater, and it's a lot of saturated light. And then I go as saturated as I can. But the weird one with that, I seem to remember, I do almost a white shape, but because of the saturation from you, it turns my light slightly pinkish. Yeah. As just a thing to look at. And it's the mix of the two is completely unique. Yeah. One or the other, you wouldn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's practical things about when you're working like that, which is, for me as the lighting designer, my priority is the Tiger and Pi and picking them out against everything else, of course. And I can't really do that work unless we're in the right video state. And for Andrzej, there's things I can do which completely trash his video, so then he can't work when I've got to. So you have to really be in tune together. And I actually think that there's something about the structure of a team where the video and lighting designer on something like this need to work as a separate little team and not to be going to the director for direction all the time. And I've worked on shows where the video designer is only taking direction from the director, and I'm only taking direction from the director. And it kind of does that. And then the director's in the middle trying to work it all out. Right. And sometimes when it's practical video use in theatre, that's fine. But something like this, you need to be working as a duo, don't you? Yeah. And making decisions between you two and not always going to the director.
It's basically coming up with an idea and then as a pair presenting that to the director. Yeah. Because obviously the director is not a lighting designer or a video designer, so they don't really know what they want until they see it. So we have to make them something. But if we do it completely separately, it's a communication thing. Really.
Yeah, and like there's a zoo section where the strength of the zoo sequence is to create these animal cages that are these small areas of the stage where the puppets live, and then we put these little fences in front. And that went on a whole journey, didn't it?
Oh,
because there was like, first of all, it was, well, in Sheffield, it was like Viper Performances creating areas, and then Andrzej doing something around the edge, and that was how we quickly got it into the show. And then even in Sheffield, it developed a bit more, and then we got to London, and it was all changed to Encore Colds units, and then it actually started more with Andrzej doing these big white areas that was the inside of the cage, and then I was filling in.
Yeah, and that was painted. So again, that was me live painting onto the stage, and then like literally getting the shapes during the tech.
Yeah,
very quickly, and then grabbing that, painting it quick, putting that back through the system, and then there's a brush-looking version of these shapes that we were coming up with choreography and all of that. But even in Sheffield, I think we tried one of those. It was like a long corridor thing.
Yeah.
For me, it was just a long strip, and it worked to a point, but
yeah,
it was a really tricky sequence to nail. At one point, I had I painted up every single little cut that's on the floor. There's all these kind of arching kind of strokes that are all kind of beveled in. So I painted all of those separately, one layer at a time, and then animated them all to kind of spin around into different shapes. And then the next zoo thing would spin into another one. But it was just too busy.
Bit too busy.
But also not quite the right language. And, but you have to try all this stuff. And it took us to London to actually get that look right.
Yeah, it's a bit like simplify really. But the strength in it is, if Andrzej's doing, let's make it really simple. If he creates a box on stage, it's a white box, and around the edge of the box is a kind of textured, kind of how would you describe it?
It's a paint.
It's like a chalk line, isn't it?
It's literally a paintbrush, a digital
paintbrush.
It's going to go wrong.
And if you turn off the lighting rig, and you look at the box on the floor, it looks great. And it's this kind of brushed image. And then you stand a person in it or a puppet, and obviously the projector isn't bright enough to light the person and puppet. So then when you do the soft fill of the same color, like the white, to fill that box, and it brightly downlights the puppet, but it's so soft you don't realize where the moving light starts and the projection stops, etc. It starts to really look like something, because you're not used to seeing projectors brightly lighting actors in that way. And that's where the blending of the two things has been really successful on the show, is that it's all about this kind of combination of the two to make it look actually like the projector's doing more work than it is with lighting the actor sometimes. It's creating all the shape and texture and life, and then just very subtly on top. It's kind of my job to stay out of the way of the projectors most of the time.
Which is really, really hard, because the set is pale.
Yeah,
it's just bounce light is a real issue. Even for me, if I put too much video on the floor near the wall, it was bouncing all over the wall.
Yeah.
Even if it was just video on its own. So I had to be careful to stay away from the wall, even if it was just me doing something.
Yeah.
So it was a really tricky surface. But I guess the tone and color of that surface meant we could be really punchy when we wanted to be.
Yeah.
It just had to be, I guess, that bright.
Yeah.
And you referenced the puppets a couple of times. There's some fantastic puppets in the show. They're just beautiful. Did you have to sort of change, phrasing the question badly, is your approach to lighting people with puppets different to lighting just people?
Yes, it is. And it tends to be that, say, for example, on The Lion King, there's two things going on in that show that's creating animals on stage, and one is masks and one is puppets. And the follow spot operators have cues where they're just irised in on the mask and sometimes full body on the person. And same with the puppets. So with the the puppets you have separate cues just to light the puppet, usually in a more saturated, brighter tone. And then sometimes there's another subtle fill on the person operating the puppet. And we did exactly that on this show, which was Richard Parker, the tiger, is in like a full CCO, really warm, glowy follow spot. That we try to, it's a soft thing, and we try to avoid the operators entirely, because there's so much bounce and spill from the white floor anyway that they're there, and you can't get away from that. But that's the thing, to make him pop against the ocean, the boat, and pie, is to really get a bold, saturated color on his kind of puppet. And the other puppets are quite often crosslit. So like the cheetahs that are they still upstage central, or they're down right? Yeah, they're down right. In the locations. Hyenas, that's it, yeah. So there's a hyena thing where they come on, they're very yellow. They're like a really acid yellow. And there was a whole thing where Max, the director, kept saying they don't look yellow enough. And then I went too yellow, and he didn't thought it was all a bit too yellow. But they are, the success of lighting those was to cross-light them against the floor, because we were losing them in the floor because the top of the cage was yellow and all of this kind of thing. So, and in that scenario, you don't really have the luxury of avoiding the puppeteers. And that's why they're in a kind of more dull tone, so that they don't pop against the puppets. But yeah, that's another thing to say, is there's not, I don't think I've overdone the crosslight on the show, because it's not that much of it, but there is a lot of it anyway. So there's a whole load of beam benders with luster 2s doing a whole kind of crosswash, plus a load of auras that crosslight everything. And even if you have like a scene where he's on the boat, there's just this subtle, low-level, cold crosslight across the space to pick everything out against the video. So that was a big part of the design, which was actually mainly discovered in Wyndham's theatre, because we can't do crosslight at the Sheffield Crucible. So that was another. Is there anything else that's kind of?
I know that. I mean, the puppets were painted up color-wise, like quite a number of times. Like the giraffe went through loads of different. Yeah, basically to make them more saturated, brighter,
and brighter.
Like it's that thing of it more than you think.
Yeah,
but they went through a lot of repaints just to get them to read, along with increasing the lighting. That was a change from Sheffield. I mean, the biggest change from Sheffield that we haven't even mentioned is the walls were not automated in Sheffield.
Yeah.
So the big thing for that is that I couldn't track the walls at all, so I didn't track the walls in Sheffield. I had them they were in a position, I put video on it, and then when they moved, I had to turn off. Tim came on, they moved, Tim went off and I went on. So we had to do a lot of that, and when they found around, it was all human pushed. Yeah. And then when we came into London, they were all automated, so I had a whole new bag of tricks to attempt to play.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it just meant that the moment, like when we first moved the wall back, in London is magical in one way, simply because the texture of the hospital that I put on the wall can track with it. So it really looks like the whole space doesn't really change much, but it's moving and your eyes can't quite figure out what's going on. Whereas before it was a lot more obvious because I literally had to turn my stuff off. Yeah. And the scene change just felt different. Yeah. So it was just, really nice thing to be able to play with.
Yeah. And the other thing about all that, I mean, I'm only 36, but I feel old-fashioned saying this, which is I'm still fascinated with whatever Andrzej's doing, is all of the shapes that are picked out with projectors are kind of, it all just does its own thing, doesn't it? So like, it doesn't matter where anything is on stage, whatever content he's sending it looks great and it's all there. And that's obviously because you're tied into the automation system, but that's still kind of fascinating. Whenever I see all that going on, because obviously in the lighting world, we are not there yet with all of that technology. The desks aren't literally tracking all the scenery around all the time. So for us, it's very much still a queue structure doing that.
It's funny though, we didn't plan to track anything when we started. It was I think my engineer Dan mentioned it. It's like, I think someone from automation went, "Oh, we can send you some data." And like, okay. What do we need? And then I guess Mike went to get a box and it plugged in somewhere, and then we started getting data, and there was lots of maths going on, and it's like, all right, yeah, I think it's going to work. It wasn't quite there in Sheffield. It was doing this thing where every time it went to 360, it kind of did like that. It was really annoying, but it was a late idea, and we just kind of ran with it. And then we're like, okay, what other axis can we have? The boat coming up, great. Let's track that as well. And it was the first time as a video team we'd really tried that in that way. So we were learning loads and loads and loads of stuff on that.
Yeah.
I was figuring out where to use it as well, because sometimes I made the water track around and sometimes I didn't. Depended if I want the boat to feel like it was moving in water or whether we were just doing a big filmic shift around and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't an original idea for the design at all.
Yeah.
It kind of grew. And then in London, we just went to town with it.
Yeah. And a really good example of that, there's something that we, couldn't really do with lighting. I mean, we could, but it'd be very difficult, is there's a low shot with a projector that lights the boat. Mm-hmm. And it knows exactly where the boat is, so it's tracking it. And Andrzej just one day put the reflection off of the water onto the front of the boat. Mm. And I just thought, well, I'll just go home now. So that's basically it. That's the whole show. And it just looks brilliant. And then it's that because it's tracking it just works so well. And we wouldn't be doing that. I mean, we could do something similar with a moving light with an effect wheel, but it would never be.
It's not quite the same.
Never be that. Yeah. And that's this whole thing of the set being tracked with the projectors the whole time has made the whole thing have so much life to it. That more so at the Wyndhams because of the wall and everything. But that's where I think where I enjoy watching it actually is the detail that Andrzej's put in. That's constantly moving is brilliant.
It's extraordinary. How many projectors are there on the rig? Because from where I was sitting, I lost count after a while.
Floor has 4, so we split it up into quarters basically. Mm-hmm. So that's the same as Sheffield. Mm-hmm. I mean, Sheffield is way higher up, so much easier to do. Wyndhams, we were struggling for a long time to find positions, so we ended up with 2 in the auditorium. Luckily, they're not too noisy. I mean, they're quite far up and out of the way. I think those are 20K, so there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 blended across the center, and then we've got 4. So then the 5th one is doing the boat, literally directly above, and again that just tracks with it, goes around 5. And we have 1 from the front, which is on the circle. Again, does the boat and a couple of other bits.
And then 1 on the next one.
Yeah, and then
2 that do the wall.
Well, there's 2 that do the wall. So in Sheffield, it was actually 1 per wall side.
Right.
Because the tricky thing there was to not get the shadows of the cast on the wall. So as the boat went round, the angle was too shallow. Suddenly, when Hiran stood on the boat, you see his shadow on the sky, and it just destroys the illusion. So we had to creep them round quite acutely, and then we tried to find a similar position in the Wyndhams, and it just didn't exist. We looked at like cross positions just behind, cutting bits out of masking flats, and it's just like disaster. So then I thought, well, what if we try extreme short throw? And it's like, yeah, great. So LX1 can see the whole wall, but then when it tracked back and it spent most of Act 2 in its upstage, we were overspilling it so far, you lose brightness resolution. So we put in a second one that did that position. So the first one could hit it in its downstage, track it upstage, and then we sneakily do a shift to the other projector when it got up. And then when most of the show, especially Act 2, was up there, it was using the second one. So that was the kind of change from Sheffield to London on that. I think that makes it 8. Is that right?
Yeah,
8.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Yeah, that's a fair number.
Yeah.
Yeah. You touched on the indigo emitter in series 2. So how hard would the show have been to do pre-LED?
It's a funny question. Pre-LED, well, I think we would have done less because I think when you have when you have to choose 22 colors in a scroll, etc., you just you think differently, and getting up over tea break and refocusing things and all of that is a very different kind of energy in the room. Whereas when you've got a bunch of luster twos, you really fine tune everything. But we started just on the LED conversation in Sheffield. We actually did have some luster twos, but we also had scrollers as well, because of what was available in Sheffield. And we made the rig completely LED for London. So, but there's obviously another LED conversation, which is to do with Vipers to Encores and the whole discharge lamp thing. But that's not really, that's all about the long running life of the show and levels and everything else, which is quite boring. But in terms of our creative process, having luster twos, having a full rig of those was really helpful.
Are they smoothing?
No, they're the generic ones. They do the indigo.
Oh, right, okay. No.
But also, you know, there's stuff in there as well where the moving lights do some really deep, saturated, lovely colours and effects that aren't in the luster twos. So, yeah.
Actually, one of the lights that changed a lot between shows was the one with the shadows.
Yes.
It's one of the awesome bits of the show, and it's where we changed the whole look.
Yeah.
Kind of completely from what we've done before.
Yeah.
And you found it took a couple of goes, but then you found that amazing position.
Yeah. So there's that.
Is that the little little CCD?
Yeah. It is. So there's like in Sheffield, the kind of stage left bomb was a really good shot to take you completely out of everything you've seen all evening and do a really old-fashioned theatre thing with shadows. And as the kind of real story of what's happened in the boat is being acted out and it's revolving, that's where we creep in this really low-level shot and you see the shadows a bit on the wall. And it breaks the rule that the wall is the sky, because now it's just a piece of scenery. And it kind of breaks the rule that the lighting's as clever as it's been all night, because now it's just really simple. And I think that's why it works, isn't it?
It's so good. And then you had the idea of, because I had put some of that wavy stuff on the boat again, but then you were like, why don't we try just a proper light? So I lit it with like just still white. I think I graded it from the top to the bottom, and it made the boat really, really, it's like a little
solid, like very solid
strip of light. And again, it added to the starkness of the...
Yeah, because what it needed was, you've been in the whole evening, you've been in a fantasy world of not really knowing if he's telling the truth, and he isn't telling the truth, because it's his version of events to deal with this awful thing that's happened to him. So he's told himself this story all evening. And then finally, at this point, there's supposed to be a real feeling of honesty in everything that's been put together. So that's why with the boat, I was trying to get a strip of light, and I focused the source 4 on the circle bell, just totally naff. And then he just comes along and goes, "Oh, I think that's what you're after." And it was brilliant. And then suddenly the boat was this solid object with the shadows, and doing something like that at that point in the evening is important on a show like that, because otherwise you're just lost in kind of melee of everything being beautiful. So
it's one of those kind of sit up and like, oh, it's just, we found almost like another gear.
Yeah.
So I even lit the water differently. I made it look like it was lit from that light that you were doing the shadows with. So I put a 3D light on my water sim and lit it like that. So it looks like it's with the boat. It's just really fun.
It's just such a lovely piece of theatre, right? And it's I guess that's kind of the beauty of theatre, is you get those moments where you can just pull it right back to the simplest single light, no color. It looked to me that there was no color in
it. Yeah.
And just, I don't use the expression back to basics, but that's really what it is. You just strip it all back and going, actually, here's just this little breath, this little moment of of honesty, as you call it, which actually is a lovely way to phrase it.
Yeah.
How long did it take to put it all together? So from let's talk London, because obviously there's been a journey to that point, but from sort of bump in to open to first audience.
Well, the first thing to say about that, that's just a physical thing, is that the theatre space needed the stalls taken out,
right,
and the kind of stage itself rebuilding, stage floor. So that whole process was about a week, essentially. I think it was like a Sunday through Monday, and was it about a week? And then
it was something like that. There was a little bit of a crossover with they were still doing the stalls meeting while the set was going in, and we were setting up our desks.
Yeah,
because the stage was also on a rake in the Wyndhams, which it wasn't on in Sheffield.
Yeah,
so there were other things to try. It was a different automation company, so they were coming at it fresh as well. Just lots of things to kind of figure out, and I guess getting it up in the air in the right order. Once certain things were happening on stage, I guess you couldn't get above until so it was quite chaotic.
But the kind of process with it is we had maybe 2 or 3 days before the cast were on where we could turn working lights off and really look at things.
My favourite bit,
which is that's the fun bit, and really at that point on something like this where you're remounting it and knowing that there's lots of change ahead, you're really just trying to make something acceptable for the first tech session, and that's the kind of energy of those sessions, really, is just to make sure you've got something going on. And then the minute everybody's in there and the cast are on and wearing costumes and everything else, everything changes anyway. So as everybody knows, that's how it works. And then things are really quick. Like Andrzej's really fast at changing stuff. And it was easy for me to change things because it wasn't a big lighting rig. When doing something like Back to the Future, where you're going to a musical number, and there's 100 cues in one number, that needs serious time to be working at that level, and you need lighting sessions to do it. But on Life of Pi, you need the opposite, which is you need everyone in the space, and it's a very delicate process. So most of it happened with everyone in the room to get the building blocks in, and then lots of tidying up in morning sessions with us. Was the kind of process, really. It wasn't a kind of let's all sit down for a week and stare at it and work on what it should be. It's very organic how it came together, really.
And me and Tim set up in the circle, separate from the rest of the team that were down in the stalls, because we needed to see the floor.
Which was brilliant.
So we were
being out of all that.
That extra layer of separation.
But when we had our morning sessions, we would do work together, and then Mac's director would come along for a bit at the end, and we'd look at any new bits and pieces, and he'll be on a god mic during the tech anyway, so everyone could hear everything. But we needed that vantage point. At some shows I get my team to set up a high camera on the circle or something. I know on Juliet we had that just so that we could see that was more Howard than me, but so you could see the floor as well, and actually just having that is really handy on some shows. But on Pi it made more sense to see that with our own eyes. And then we could always run downstairs to look at the other angle. As and when, and look at it during previews. And I did do a bit of that and went down there and thought, definitely underlit it from the stalls. It felt quite gloomy in the stalls at first. Not for a dress rehearsals and a preview, but like every session I'd kind of wander down there for 10 minutes. And actually the process of being sat up there the whole time meant that things like just filling in faces from the side and like a lower shot that was more friendly, you just don't do when you're sat in the circles. It looks great up there. So that was a little bit of a lesson learned, actually. I went down there and the hospital scenes were just like these stark, horrible, downlit kind of things, and upstairs they were like quite bright. So that was a bit of a lesson, really.
I'd like to dig into a little bit more about how you connect, the sort of process of tracking scenery and projection sort of works, because it's done seamlessly. It's just there's some moments you just like, do that again. It's just lovely.
It's really down to my technical team, Dan and Mike. Just I guess wizards at that. It's literally, so I guess take the Revolve, for example. So I made the 3D model of the set from the tech drawings. Fingers crossed it's the same when it arrives on set. I mean, it generally never is. So there's usually a bit of warping and there's things, if something's majorly wrong, I'll have to redo the 3D model. Sometimes we'll do physical measurements on stage to double check that the dimensions are what they said they were and things like that. So that can be a bit of a back and forward once we actually get on site. But there's a 3D model of all the bits. 3D models is what Disguise uses, which is the server that we had on the show. A lot of video servers use 3D models now, and they use texture maps to get the video onto them. So the fact that I make the 3D models for my previs and all of that means I can use that now all the way through to the end product, which is easy as well. So we have that 3D model in Disguise. The automation company will send us data. No idea what that data looks like at all. That's something that Dan and Mike know all about. But I think with our system, it's telling us the angle that it's at, because some of them do a wind up thing and then they have to unwind. And I think it's just a 0 to 360, and at all times it knows where that is. So that number gets piped through DMX or something like that. But that number comes in and it gets linked to a value in the 3D software Disguise. And it just knows that between, it's like a range mapper. It's between 0 and 360. They might be sending in numbers in another format, but it knows that when it's in its home position, that's 0, and then it just knows which way to go. So anytime it moves, the little 3D model in Disguise moves around. Same with the walls, same with the boat coming up and down. And it just takes a lot of, can we restart that again, in the kind of fit up, line up bits. And it's just literally like up and down until we just fine tune it to work. Being on the rake made it extra difficult because it's never going to be completely flat. It's made of wood. It's, it might be slightly warped. It might not be exactly where we think it is in real world. So as it was spinning around, that was the hardest one to get in because the boat would move up and down ever so slightly. Same with the pivot of the walls. If we were a few centimeters off, if it did a full 360, it would go off ever so slightly. So, you learn to live with certain bits and you try and tweak it the best you can. But once it's set up, you do nothing at all. It's the same with tracking front cloths. We quite often put wire pulls onto those. And again, you get your in position, your out position, and then anytime it goes up and down, Disguise knows where it is, and you can literally video track seamless front cloths up and down. And when it works, it's amazing. When it doesn't work, it's really distracting.
Yeah.
So it's just being robust with it, and you try and break it basically while you're setting it up, and so it's robust when you need it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And what's controlling it all? I believe there's NEOS, I think, that's you programmed on.
Yeah.
And was it separate consoles for video and lighting, and then you smooshed them together, or are they still separate entities that talk to each other?
What's that?
Was it all?
Is it that little? Is it called a Nomad? Or is that a different thing?
Nomads.
So I think that's generally what my programmers have. It's like a PC desktop version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then video we have a queue list alongside yours, but we just put in. I mean, I'm sure it's more complicated than this.
Yeah.
But we put in the same number and it just fires.
Yeah.
Right. So my video key number is always the same as lighting.
Yeah.
So I have your queue list on a monitor next to me, so I can see what's what, and then we'll look and go, okay, well that queue is the same. If we need another one, then I'll ask you for a queue, and we'll get given a number.
Mm.
And I think it's basically that, isn't it?
Yeah. We don't have time code to show or anything like that.
Okay.
So it's all queue based, and primarily it's a very traditional queuing of lighting queues, DSM, that trigger video.
We have a few MIDIs from sound.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out the delay between, because it goes sound, lighting, video. So I'll put up a beat test on the screen and we'll trigger it and see how far off. And if we need something to go exactly, with an explosion sound, then sound can do a little delay on their sound firing trigger us at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's just something we have to do on every show.
Yeah, fair enough.
You rely on follow spots quite heavily,
Yeah,
as you would expect with the amount of projector content and puppets and everything
Yeah.
else. What were you using?
we were using 2 encores, colds, performances with heavy frost, in follow spot mode. So they're physically. We don't have we don't have a tracking system. Yeah, it's 2 operators. And that was brilliant, obviously, because we were setting the colors and levels, and the whole rig was 18 encores. I think 22 in the end, including the follow spots, something like that.
Okay.
So it just meant that it was kind of seamless, all of the colors and levels, and there's no discharge lamps that are going to fade or anything like that. So it was a good choice in the end.
And there are only two spots.
There's just 2, yeah.
They must be working really hard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they are.
There's moments where it looked like almost every line, not quite, but was a spot swap.
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. There's a little bit of that going on. There are quite high side spots in there, which is a choice so that the spill doesn't hit the back wall, essentially, so you lose it all into the floor. But they're very steep, which works really great for the video, because when Pi's on the raft in the middle of the space and you only want to light him, if they were any lower and the angle was doing a big old thing across the floor, they'd kind of ruin it. And you'd end up crosslit, which is very difficult for the people in the balcony and circle to just rely on Crosslight the whole time. So yeah, they're a really important part of making the video work, actually.
Right, and your spotters are with you through the whole tech process as you learning it. I mean, that has to be right.
Yeah.
There's
the
a lot
producer
going on.
tried to not have them there. So I was like, it's not going to work. Like, I'm not just going to turn up for a dress rehearsal and have a sheet in front of me.
Here's your cue sheet.
Yeah, and there's some really delicate, careful stuff going on there with irising and fading and all of that. So, they do work pretty hard.
Good. Let our studio audience know I've been doing a lot of the talking. If you have any questions, do give us a wave and we'll come out to you. Absolutely. So the one thing that I was sort of not surprised is the wrong word. What I really enjoyed was how cleverly, because I've read the book and I've seen the film, how cleverly it was adapted for the stage, and which bits were in, which bits were out, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How soon in the process were you involved, and were any of those decisions based on what's possible technically, or were you presented with here's what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, so Andrzej can speak about this as well, because it was a big thing that changed from tech process to previews in Sheffield, and then in London we kind of accepted that this was the best way of doing it. But Pi goes to the island in the story, and we did have a big physical set change where the walls opened again and all of these vines kind of came into the space, and we created a whole different look for the meerkats, who's going to be in this big set piece. But it was one of those things where the budget had kind of run out a bit, and this thing was made. It's still there in the theatre. It's now flown in to be the backing of the cages in the zoo. It's that piece that you see. But that was an island thing, but it didn't work out. It was too tricky to pull it down stage, and it all was a little bit messy and hard to do with the cast. So that was the one kind of casualty of the design that didn't make it even to the first preview in Sheffield. But we did tech a version of it and to play.
Yeah, and it was really fun. The vines were puppeteered to catch the tiger, and he kind of fought to escape. Or there was a whole sequence with the meerkats talking to Pi. I mean, in the story, there are meant to be basically hundreds of thousands of meerkats all around. So we were even discussing, how can we make it seem like there's loads and loads? And we're like, pull a string and all these heads come out all around the auditorium, and we're going down all those routes, but I mean, ultimately the pacing of the show with that didn't really work.
Yeah,
it felt like one scene too many, and we had so many magical moments, and it was like we needed to get to the real story, which is kind of the next scene. And it kind of felt, story-wise and just flow-wise, it was just one magical bit too far, and we needed to thunder through to get to this real story.
Yeah,
and it was a really hard decision. I mean, it was, discussed for quite a while in Sheffield, and I think Lolita, the writer, would love it to be there as well. And it was just lots of conversation about, can we put it in? What should we change it to? If we do it in London, what should we try? But ultimately, just the pacing of the show worked. And it didn't make the cut. But we did loads of different bits. I did a whole acid-looking watery floor thing, and I mean, the story is still there, but it's not done as a scene change. He does it as a kind of halfway intro to a hospital scene, and he kind of explains it now rather than us acting it out, which just gets the pace going a bit quicker.
But the truth is that with these kind of films that end up on stage, like Colin Ingram with Back to the Future was just desperate to put that show on stage, and Simon was the same with this. And when it was written, Tim Hatley wasn't involved, is the truth, and they just go for it. And then before you know it, there's all these like big visuals that are in a script. We had the same thing for Ghost the Musical, where there was all sorts of big idea, and then he jumps through the subway train wall, all of this stuff. And it gets presented to you without anybody working out how to do it, actually, which is kind of the kind of beauty of it. Is if the designers, I think, were really involved at the very start, it might be more limiting, because we'd probably go, well, actually, these are the things that you can do visually, so maybe you should rewrite it. But so there's a kind of freedom in allowing the writer and the producer to just go, okay, this is the story, you guys resolve it. And that's kind of how it's been with Simon. That answers that question. Yeah.
Absolutely. There are a couple of storm sequences, but the first, when the ship sinks, there's a lot going on there, and that was also one of those moments where it started to become quite hard to tell as to where that was, who was doing what, which was lovely. I mean, that felt like it was one of the biggest sequences in the show. Is that fair?
The storm where
the Tim sum.
The Tim sum. So they're on the boat, and the animals come out of the cage.
So how was that? Like, so your sort of process for that? Because I could imagine that there was several. I can do this, or but I can do this.
Well, so that sequence has. So one of the big things about the show is you'll notice there's lots of animals, but not lots of puppeteers. So you can never have all of the animals on stage at once, because you'd need 40 puppeteers to do that. So what that meant was, when they were teching it, it took a long time for them to work out all of their stuff, which meant over the top of it, we had a load of time to play with stuff. And then the kind of thing that's quite unique about that, which Andrzej does brilliantly, is creating the sense that the ship's rocking. And you've got the whole animation of the water doing that, but also it kind of hits. Does it hit an iceberg? Something. There's a whole thing, and everyone does that, and then it goes.
They just get rocked in the storm and then sinks, I suppose.
But there's a whole thing where it's all in sequence with the actors, and at first they're just doing what they've done in the rehearsal room with the soundtrack, and then you're looking at them doing it, and we've got effects kicking off and flashes and smoke, and Andrzej's doing his water effect. And then when you really start to see what everyone else is doing in the space, that's when you start layering in. So, and this, I think this is good for any students that are listening, is that when you see a big sequence like that in a show, we don't start at the beginning and add absolutely everything in on a kind of timeline. It's very kind of broad brushstrokes go in, and you get a feel for it. And then the automation and the actors kind of get added. And then the layering and going back and adding the detail is how it works. Because when you see a sequence like that, it can be quite intimidating. Because it was for me when I was young and I was like looking at something and I was like, where do you start with that? Like, who's had that idea to? But it's actually it's kind of a messy, organic-y process, really.
Fair enough. Are there any questions from anyone in the room?
You mentioned video earlier. Like how much did it change from when you started to when you got into the space? Like, did that inform your lighting choices and seeing stuff beforehand and then seeing it in space?
So I'll just repeat the question for the people who are online. Let's see how much I was paying attention to that question. Right, so the question was...
That's quite brave.
Yeah, there we go. With all your previs, how much... See, I've gone sidetrack myself already now. How much of the previs made it through to the show, really, and how much sort of then change? How much was that your sort of working model, and then go from there? Is that the essence? That was a lot of pressure.
To be honest, generally not that much. The previs, for the most part, is for me than to play around with, so that I know what I'm doing, really. I like my drawings and paintings. I use a lot more, mainly so that I can make decisions much later and last minute and not have to lock into something. Because I never turn up to text with anything finished because there's no point. Literally everything will change. So it has to be in layers. It has to be in pieces. It's a way to make it adaptable quickly as well. And you just learn, what can be split up. I mean, the more I use disguise, the more I'm keeping things in layers in that as well. I mean, from back when I was doing stuff with QLab, or even, when I started, my first couple of shows were on Keynote, ridiculous now, but, everything has to be a fully rendered collapsed thing. So I'm used to doing that more often than anything else. But, I'll keep stuff split out a lot more, and I'll know what can stay split out as well. Because I like to, once we know what the show is, I'll go back and do some re-renders to get all the completely fine details in, collapse it down, make it look the best it can look. And quite often that means getting rid of some of the layering. It's the same in editing. It's the same in VFX work as well. But with disguise, there's always, a director might turn around and go, only that moon was a little bit higher up. And it's like, I've already crunched it into all that. So rather than a completely re-render, it's just a little dial on disguise. So that's why you turn up with it not all finished. But yes, it's also the adaptability, the playtime in those kind of couple of days before the cast and everyone arrive. I always make sure I have definitely at least one session just to throw stuff up on the stage, because I don't know what it looks like until it's there. Because LED is a bit easier because you kind of know what you're going to get. But with projection, it's all about what the surface is made of. And, you can have experience to an extent, but you never really know because you don't know what's bouncing where. So that side of it is impossible to previs anyway. So the previs is literally just about shapes, things that I could do. And it's grabbing a palette. It's creating it is a bit like an oil painter. You make yourself a palette of stuff, and that's what I use, and that's what I get used to using through the design process. So when I'm on stage, I'm like, okay, I know everything about my design in this palette. Doesn't mean I can grab things from other sides. And the previs just helps me get my brain into the gear of the show. So it'll be the same when we, do any show. If we get to do Pi again, the previs side of it, I'll do another version of it, but it'll have some more final rendered stuff on it. But if there's some new ideas, I can just get my brain back into it again. In addition to watching, obviously, the video of the show, which is a much easier way to get back into it. But to get back into it design-wise, you need a flow. And the only way to do that is to get your brain back into it. And the previs system I have is really helpful. My previs system has changed since, a couple of shows back. So I use an app called Element on After Effects, which is... it's just a 3D rendering thing for After Effects, but it means that I can take the disguise model into After Effects and pipe the content onto it the same as disguise. And it means I'm not making stuff just for previs purposes. I can actually make the real content and use it in my previs. So that's sped that up, and it's a much quicker way to show stuff to a director as well now. So that's that's just a new thing. So I think the previs will probably be even more useful going forwards. But it depends on the show, but it's mainly my paintings and drawings on Procreate that I use the most on Pi, really.
Cool. A couple of questions have come in online. How many people on your lighting and video teams?
Lighting team, we had, so there's me and an associate programmer, because it's quite a small play. We opted for that option instead of having a separate associate. And then we have 2 follow spot operators. There's 4 house staff which look after the show, and we had 1 production electrician and 3 freelance electricians that supported the process up until something like the 4th preview. So quite a good sized team for a play, actually.
Yeah.
And then video wise, there was me making all the content and all that jazz. We had system designer and programmer, same person. And then we had a production video engineer. And then we just have a couple of in-house people that kind of run the show day to day. It's like a video 1 and 2, and they also look after some of the sound stuff as well.
Right.
So the core team is just 3 of us, two technical and 1 creative kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, quite small. But I mean, that's my setup on nearly every show. To
Right.
be honest, it's just quite often just 3 people.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What one thing would you change if you get to do it again?
Well, I changed the water sim slightly for London. I'm considering another little change there. I wanted to try real-time rendering for the water. Was it 2019? Yeah. In 2019, I looked at Notch, I looked at Unreal and things like that, and it just didn't look very good. And I just was like, no, absolutely not. Obviously, Unreal 5 has come out now, and it's just gone in just the last kind of 3 years, it's just exploded. So I guess one thing to try might be real-time simulations, but they're still a little bit limiting. And also, the look of the water, I suppose, is designed specifically for the set anyway, and the way that looks. So I don't know if I would change it, but I would love to have a go with that side of things. I don't think there's a couple of ideas. During the zoo sequence, I did a couple of spinning tree shadow transitions. Well, I did one, and then I ran out of time to do the other one. So I'm definitely going to put them in.
Yeah.
If we get to do it again, but I don't know, probably exhausted most of the things I can throw on the stage.
Yeah. I've got one big thing, which would be a tracking system for follow spots. Okay. And that's because moving forward with it, it is going to do tours and things eventually, we hope anyway. The consistency of those steep positions, follow spots, will become an issue. So we're hoping on its next outing that we'd have 2 follow spot operators still, but add something like a Zap track system,
right,
or a tracking system that will allow us to have multiple angles on Pi and various people at any one time. Because that's the thing it's lacking at the moment, is the ability to track Pi and the Tiger and backlight them, or do kind of angles from an X1 that's very crosslighty, which would just add a whole layer to it, which I'm quite excited about doing. Yeah.
Brilliant. So starts in Sheffield, and it's going to transfer somewhere. What's your sort of process for archiving stuff and keeping notes? Because obviously we weren't expecting the world to happen as it did, right?
Yeah.
So there's a gap now between original and restage. So what's your sort of archive process to be able to pull it all back together?
So we'll just do a normal Lightbright document as normal. Plus, we'll use Andy Waller's Moving Light program. I forgot the title of.
Moving Light Assistant?
Moving Light Assistant, yeah. And we will do that. We didn't have time to do it because of the whole pandemic and coming out of COVID and all the rest of it. We were struggling a little bit with time in the theatre when we first opened because of lots of re-rehearsing of understudies. So we never had the time to do that properly and document it, but we are going to do that, which becomes the basis of something to remount it. But really something as complex as this, it requires, if it's going to the US, it would be a US associate to kind of take it on board. Or if we're doing a UK tour, we'd kind of have the UK associate, Elliot Smith, will be adapting it, and they'll have their own process, really. If something exists long term, sat in a theatre, it's much easier to not worry about the documentation, of course, because it's there, you can reference it. But when you know something's got an end date, that's when you kind of really dive in on the documentation.
Fair enough.
I'm pretty good at documentation.
What is your documentation?
So I've got one of the first things I do, even when I read the script, I'll read the script once, and then twice I'll write where the scene bits are and start noting, but I'll also write a cue list. Then that cue list goes through all the way. So I've got a full cue list, numbers, descriptions. I give that to the DSM when I leave for, once we're open, so they have a copy of what lighting cues have videos on. But that gives us that's a complete document of all the video bits that go on as far as cueing goes. And then my After Effects, I do a complete sort through and I make a collected project file. So it's basically like a bundle, and then that gets archived online and my NAS at home. So I've got that literally whenever I need, and I can grab it from anywhere in the world. And then the disguise file is archived as well. So, and I guess the advantage is we can literally open that and spool through the show. It's just a big timeline. And then while we're teching previews, we have a video system set up. I mean, we used to use Stamp. I think sometimes we do. There's another one we tried when I did Drifter's Girl called Q to Do, I think it's called. I mean, there's a few of them around now, but we pipe in the show feed. It shows you what LX number we're in, what gets triggered. It's all overlaid on top. Right. And we also get the DSM feed in as well. So we've got them on different, stereos things on the soundtrack. And that becomes, the last preview then becomes that archive. So anytime I can just go on and you can just run back and forward, and the LX cues just do all their numbers, and there's a little time code thing if there's time code, and that just, for us, that and that's all we need really. And we just pick a really good angle for it.
How many cues are there in the show?
300 and something?
350 something, yeah.
That's a reasonable number.
Yeah.
That's a day's work, right?
Yeah.
That's many thank yous.
Yeah, for play, yeah.
Yeah,
for play, it's quite.
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's yeah. So what's next? What projects are in the pipeline for you, or are you currently working on? Are you allowed to say NDAs? With
you mean with Pi?
No,
in general.
In general.
Oh right. Yeah, what are you up to?
I'm doing doing a show at Chichester called The Unfriend, which is it's a much smaller thing, but I'm overcomplicating it with video, of course. So we've got some NDI live phone camera things, and I'm projecting a printed cloth onto itself, which I designed this time, so it makes it a bit easier. And then I'll do some time of day changes and things like that. So that's coming up. And then I'm doing Anne Juliet is just started rehearsals today and for its Toronto run. So I'll be going out to do that in June. And then I'm doing Time Traveler's Wife musical in September. I think that's all I'm allowed to say.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm doing the next production I'll light is Jack Absolute Flies Again at the National. And then in September, I'm back there again doing the Crucible, both in the Olivier.
Nice.
And then currently designing, well, we've got versions of Li-Fi happening, but versions of Back to the Future, potentially in New York, and also a new show at Disneyland Paris.
Nice.
So yeah, fun.
Good. A couple of things keeping you busy.
Yeah.
So just swinging back to Pi again. What's your favourite moment in the show?
Favorite moment is when we snap into it's basically when the boat comes up first time and we snap into the storm at sea with Pi in the boat. I think that is it's the biggest moment for me. I also love it when we go to the market, because what has been a very clinical space, the hospital, and lots of video, you suddenly go into this huge, what looks like a big musical set piece, and there's lots of color and it's fun. So I do like that, because I suddenly felt, oh God, now I've got to light a play. And before it was just whatever he's doing, I've got to avoid it. And then suddenly it was like you turned off for that.
Yeah, it's nice because the back of the walls, we see it then, and we see it on the Tim Sun boat.
Yeah.
And that's where video and lighting can merge again for the first time. But the market is all you. I think I snuck in a projector.
Yeah,
in the London
texture,
one. Yeah, just around the edge.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's not really any video in that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, for me it's the same moment. I mean, it's the first time we see the boat. It does a revolve. The whole space goes wibbly wobbly. The wall moves back. It's just everything all in one. And then it just goes snap, and we're in this enormous storm, and the sound just thunders.
Yeah.
And it's just quite a moment, that one.
And the floor, it kind of, it's the highest contrast the sea ever is in the show, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird one, that. I mean, I tried loads of different types of water as well, and actually I had to pull it back a lot, and it's a mix of animated, real stuff. There are things I've thrown on there that are not real as well. I added in a rain layer that's completely unrealistic. It's just about getting movement, and the water is weird as well. I tried to do realism with scale, and actually that didn't work, and I had to slow it down, and the slower and bigger it was, the smaller the boat felt.
Yeah.
And actually, to make it seem like a big storm, I had to pull it up really far away from reality, and it was the contrast that did it, because I don't think you do any saturated light in that one either, just to keep the contrast down. It's the only time we do that.
Yeah.
And it's such a shift from just a white, bright hospital. And it's like a light switch, and it just goes snap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
How, I mean, water is generally a hard thing to do and replicate. I mean, you even talk to the Pixar guys, and they're going, water.
Oh, it's the hardest thing.
It's one of those things.
It's the most expensive thing. I mean, I know loads about it. I'm a big lover of VFX. I watch loads of breakdowns. I used to subscribe to a visual effects magazine. Well, it was basically a book called Cinefex when I was a student, and it came out every 3 months, I think it was, and it broke down just a bunch of movies. And that was obviously a mix of models and things like that. But back in the day, water was done with miniatures, and you had to slow it down to make it look like it's the right scale. And then as soon as you start trying to do anything simulated, it eats up computers. I do everything on just basically a laptop, so my computer can only take so much. So I've learned how to do it in pieces and kind of put it together. But again, it depends on what software you use. So I use Cinema 4D. I beta tested the first fluid simulation plugin for cinema, which doesn't exist anymore. It's been absorbed into the one that I use now. But back then it was all science, and you needed like a degree in physics and coding, and I could never recreate the same thing twice. And it just wasn't artist friendly. It's still a little tricky, but the artist tools are much easier. So you can kind of throw things at it like a painter, and you can do unrealistic looking things. But it just takes up a lot of time, a lot of R&D. And it's pulling away from realism is the hardest thing about it. And just having the computer power. I don't have all of that stuff, and I haven't got a render farm the size of a football field that can thunder out stuff for a week. It's a different approach.
But that was, I think, one of the things that was lovely about it is you create these very real environments with not always very real textures and images, and I think it's really clever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tried realism. I tried real water, and it just didn't work. And I think it's because, I mean, set design is not, for theatre anyway, is not realism. So if you put realism onto an unrealistic set, they can sometimes work against each other. Sometimes it's great, and it's the kind of look you want. But when it came to the water, it was devoid of heart and life, and it just wasn't vibrant. And yeah, it's completely unrealistic what I do, and in some forms, it's quite basic light, but the focus is pie in the middle. So actually what you want is this to be in a way out of focus. So it's in your peripherals and the movement is constant. So you concentrate on the acting and what's being said. And this just fills in your peripheral vision with movement. And you just believe that he's on a boat on the water. And I think if it was overly complicated, that wouldn't work. So I had to pull that back. Basically.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I don't think there's anything else out from the house. One last thing to wrap it up, because I know we've got a fair sort of student body in with us tonight and joining us online. Top tip, somebody who wants to get into this industry. What's your top do's or don'ts?
Well, should we answer separately? So it depends really. If for a designer, you mean? Designer?
Someone wants to get into design, whether it's lighting or video.
I'd say there's a few things to think about. One is go to see as much new theatre as possible. Just because I think it's really important to know what other people are doing, and what the industry is doing. So make use of all of the student discounts while you can, and go and see the shows. That is the most important thing. Go and see what it's all about, and think about what your reaction is to it, and what sort of designer you want to be. And the other tip, for light and design, I'd say is to not focus on having a particular style, and to realize that light and design itself is a layer that comes in after a design process has happened, that's there to elevate other people's work. And it's not there you're not like a Tate modern artist this is how I do it. You're there to be a total team player in every sense of the word. And that's a really important thing to kind of stay in work, but also for the work itself to be integrated, like we've done on this, basically.
So I'll come to you in a sec. I just, as something you said, popped a question into my mind, and that's what's the one thing that you've seen another designer do that you wish you had thought of first?
I wish I'd thought first. I think the reason I don't think I can answer it is because the things that I was watching other designers do that I think are brilliant, I wasn't able to be doing it because I was like 12 or 14. So there's never been, I suppose you could ask me, last year, did I see something that somebody did? And I wish I'd have thought of that, but the answer is no, actually.
Fair enough.
But, of course, I have favorite other designers that I think do brilliant things. But the truth is they were all doing brilliant things when I was really young, when I wasn't actually putting shows together myself anyway. But there's lots of other people's ideas that have influenced everything I'm doing, to do in general cover and Crosslight and how to use follow spots, etc., etc. And I've taken a lot from quite big American designers and how they do musicals when I've been lucky enough to work on a big musical, but also, Neil Austin and Hugh Vanstone and those designers that do detail very well with plays. Obviously I was Hugh's associate for 6 years, so I've taken a lot of influence from Hugh's stuff. So there isn't really a one thing I can say, but it's a much messier process than that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Andrzej, how about you? Tips for students?
How do you become one first?
I mean, the weird thing is when I started, there weren't really many video designers around anyway. Like, it wasn't a thing. I kind of fell into it. There were like 3 or 4 people that were doing it, I think, back then. I mean, the thing about, I guess, nearly all the designers that are working now obviously didn't do video design. There were no courses. You've got people that were cinematographers, graphic designers. I came from set design. You have some people that were fine artists, painters, photographers. So it's that thing of, I think you need to explore other forms of creativity and design and art creation, and let that feed into what you want to put on stage as a video designer. Forget about all the technical stuff. It was something I learned when I did my set design course. It was a very theoretical based course, nothing about practical stuff. They didn't really teach model making, technical drawing. They left you to figure that out for yourself. They taught you how to think about character, break down stories, decide what a space needs for the design in order to tell the story, not what you think is going to look cool or is going to get people to notice you. And I followed that through with the video. I'm very subtle with the way I try and use video. I never want it to pull focus unless a director specifically goes, can you please pull focus away from this or that, or this moment needs to be, big for whatever reason, as long as it's a story-based thing. So I think I'd say, don't focus on the technical stuff with regards, projectors, media servers. Just think about design. Read up about things that aren't theatre. Go see galleries, go see exhibitions, watch movies. I love composing. I love cooking. I play the piano in my studio if I need a break from looking at the screen, or PS5. Finally got one. Just anything else. There's so much design in our entire life. So if there's something that excites you, explore that, and then you can pull a lot of that in. I love cinematography, so I try and do a lot of in-camera stuff now. So my last show at Chichester, I ended up rigging glass shards in front of the lens in order to do shards of imagery, and sticking tiny little bits of mirror so that when you're actually physically shooting the subject, I'm not adding in loads of post-production to do the same effect. I made the time to experiment and do it in camera. And that's because I love that style of filmmaking. In fact, the non-VFX side, to be honest, a lot of the practical stuff I love. So it's about embracing what you love about just things that you watch, and you put that into your design. And then the biggest one is you have to know, when it comes to animation, editing, you have to know the software like the back of your hand. If you don't, you can't be creative. So if I go out for a walk with the dogs, I can think about a sequence, and in my head, I can literally put it together in After Effects, and I know what filters, what layer order, and I can make the sequence while I'm having a wander. And then when I get back, the idea is there and ready to go. And I know kind of how I'm going to do it, and then I can start experimenting. If you haven't got that knowledge of your software, you are struggling you'll have the idea, but you can't form it, and you're looking through manuals, and that spark of kind of creative energy just kind of disappears a little bit, and your speed goes down as well. So when you're in the room and in the tech and you need to be fast, you just need to be able to call on all that. So that's a big one. It doesn't matter what software you use; they all basically do the same thing. But whatever you choose to use, you just have to know. So you need to love using it. You got to use it all the time. And like Tim says, go and see theatre. I don't see that much. I love the movies and computer games, and also I guess after I've been in the theatre all, doing a tech in a show, I generally don't want to go back in again with my time off. But I'll see choice bits and pieces, and I like to keep on top of what other designers are doing, but also, I chat a lot with them whenever I can. I try and see who's around and go and say hi. And the same with students. I mean, when I was a student, we didn't have social media and all of that. So it was letter writing and relying on who was coming in to talk to us on the course. But for students now, I just say, write to people. It's so easy to get in contact with anyone. And you'll find so many designers, they have time. And if they're in the same city as you, no matter where you are, you can just pop in and have a look in the theatre and just see what's going on. And it's all about looking at what other people are doing as a process and then basically stealing it and building on it. That's kind of how the world works. It's an apprentice system generally, and you'll see how something works. You go, that's great. I'll use that. But I can make it better because I now have all this other knowledge that they might not have had. And then the next person after you will do the same thing to your stuff. And but have fun with it. If you don't enjoy it, there's no point really.
Fair enough.
I take on things if they look like they'll be fun, and if they look like they're going to be interesting people to work with. That's how I choose my projects. We have no idea if something's a hit or not.
Yeah.
It was just, I like working with different people and I like trying new things and being challenged. So, choose projects based on that. But also remember that, it's not about straight into the West End when you graduate. It's not the way. You need to learn who you are as a designer, which requires space and time. But also, you look at the people around you when you get to do, a West End show, if you're lucky enough to do that. And actually the people that you met all those years ago on the way up, you'll find they've done the same thing, different journeys. And, I met Tim while he was an associate. I was an assistant doing set and the video wasn't even a thing. But, and then suddenly, you're both doing the same show as colleagues. And it's looking at that and looking at what's around you and just trying different things. I did a Fringe show a number of years ago just because it sounded fun. It's teeny tiny, but it's not always about the big massive ones. And you can have a lot of fun on a show with a single projector. And actually the challenge is awesome. Just seeing what you can do with it based on the fact that you've now got all this knowledge. And but I guess just chat with people. It's a really nice industry to be in. Theatre people are friendly for the most part, and and willing to chat. So anytime, just find a way to get in contact. Don't be shy about it, and don't expect things just to land on your lap. It takes work. We don't just press a button and things appear on stage. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of sleepless nights. And you have to be prepared to do that alongside, all of the rest of it.
And I'd just say starting a career as a lighting designer, you have to really get into the headspace of servicing somebody else. So if you're going to be somebody's assistant or an associate, to really embrace that role and not see it as, it's a stepping stone until I can do that. But when I was working for Hugh for all those years, I really was his assistant and as his associate, and that was where my focus was for a number of years. And it was through being good at that I got the opportunities to do other things. It wasn't like a quick kind of flash in the pan. Oh yeah, I've done that and now I can just go off and have my own career. It was like to really focus on what that means to service another person and support them, because that will be a great life lesson later down the line when you're supporting a director and a designer and a producer yourself as in the role of designer. And I think that's important. It's something that in the UK we're not as good at, and it starts from the top, because producers don't really want to pay for an associate on every single play and every single musical, and there is lots of doubling up of the programming and associate roles in the UK. They do that in the US as well, but it's a less popular way of doing it. And obviously in the US, there's lots of assistant and associate opportunities. So if you're really serious about it and you really want to be a lighting designer, I would really think about how to service a busy lighting designer as an assistant first. That's the way to learn how to behave on shows that have scale to them, as well as doing your own small shows. And then when you get eventually offered a big show, like a big West End musical, you've done so many as an assistant before, instead of doing just a very slow progression to that role and it being, maybe quite a daunting prospect. When you've already done it as an assistant, it's a very different experience.
Yeah, I completely reiterate that. It's like I was already a video designer and I decided to stop for a little bit, and I was John Driscoll's animator for a few shows.
Yeah.
And it's just, I felt I needed to do that to just see how a big show was done.
Yeah.
I went and worked in a VFX house for a couple of weeks just to see how the pipelines worked. And I learned a few tips and things on matte painting and this and that. I even did a little bit on Harry Potter 3 in the art department just to see how that worked at the time. And it's just gathering, knowledge. And it's literally just, you ask people and go, can I come along? Can I sit in on this? If there's money, can I come and work for you for a bit? And like Tim says, it's about seeing how they interact as a team so that you realize how to talk to a director, how to talk to a designer. And the other thing that Tim mentioned that's really important is we are there to service the director's vision of the show. It's not your vision of the show. You have obviously conversations with the director about how are we going to solve this, and it's in a big team. You'll have individual discussions as well. But at the end of the day, if what the director looks at on stage is wrong for them, it's gone, and it's because it's their vision and it's not yours. So if something gets cut that you might have spent ages working on, or something you really love, it's just the way it goes. Doesn't mean you can't fight for it if you think it's appropriate, because maybe they've been swayed by something that was off the cuff, and it's like, oh, we'll give it an extra couple of previews, and they look at it with fresh eyes and go, oh, actually, that is fine. I actually need to tweak this instead. I just think that's a really important thing. Is you are there to serve.
Yeah, and
the director.
I operated the follow spot on The Lion King. That's why I know all the cues. And when I was a student in my first year, so that was I actually worked at a touring house before I came to London. So any opportunity you have to be in a theatre doing something technical, whatever that is, whether it's crew or follow spot operating, it's all brilliant experience. And it's not about, and I think that being a follow spot operator in the West End on a big show like The Lion King, seeing how the building works, and then working as somebody's assistant for a number of years and really embracing that role, and then going off and trying it yourself and doing small shows is a brilliant way to kind of observe what goes on and then apply yourself to the project. If you only go, well, I want to be a lighting designer, so I'm going to start at the very smallest project I can do at like the King's Head Theatre, and that's all you know, is standing in that room with 6 parkans, and then you kind of progress. That means every single new opportunity is an alien experience to you. But if you've done it as a technician or an assistant and got a kind of real good grounding, then you're more relaxed and you can focus on making the creative work instead of, whoa, shit, now I've got 100 moving lights to worry about, etc., etc.
Fair enough.
So that is my biggest piece of advice.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Brings us to the end. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Much appreciated. It's been really good talking to you.
Yeah, no worries.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us in person for the event. Lovely to see you here. Thank you to everyone who's joined us online. Keep an eye on the website, etcconnect.com/lightbytes, and we'll hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you.